The orchard spoke in colors no voice could translate. When the suns dipped below the twin ridgelines of Veska's northern crescent, the trees would begin their silent bloom. Petals of clear crystal, thin as dragonfly wings, curled open along silver branches, shimmering in hues of cobalt and pearl. Under starlight, the grove appeared not as flora but a dream crystallized mid-breath, a frozen lullaby. In the center of that orchard, barefoot and silent, walked Nalia. Her fingers grazed each bloom as she passed. Not to inspect, but to greet. She had planted every tree herself, one per year since her exile, starting with a broken shard of a pomegranate seed pod once gifted by a man she'd once loved too deeply. Each tree grew not from soil, but from fragments of memory and mineral, a blend of ash, bone char, and the alkaline dust of Veska's caves. And yet, they bore fruit, glowing, fragile globes, sweet as rain after centuries of drought. The locals called them ghost apples. Traders called them lux orbs. Nalia never called them anything at all. She didn't speak. Not in 12 years. Not since the tribunal on Ever sentenced her to voluntary isolation for the murder of her husband, a charismatic diplomat who had once promised a future of reform and transparency. He had died in a shuttle blast en route to negotiate peace between two fractured colonies. And Nalia, his widow, had been found, emotionally compromised, her grief mistaken for guilt, her silence weaponized against her. When they exiled her, she didn't scream. She didn't weep. She accepted Veska and its arid cold. She built her grove where nothing grew. And each spring, when the fruit ripened, she placed a basket near the perimeter, no payment required, and disappeared before anyone arrived. This is how she lived. Until the day the stranger came. He didn't arrive in a military shuttle or a sleek diplomat cruiser. His skiff was unmarked, battered by stardust and rusted at the seams. He landed beyond the low ridge and walked the rest of the way on foot, dust trailing behind his boots like breath in winter. He was taller than most Vescan settlers, with a lean frame made for long walks and longer conversations. A faded satchel thudded against his hip with each step, filled with books instead of weapons. And his eyes, dark, unreadable, were not the eyes of a scout or a spy. When he found the orchard, he froze. For 5 full minutes, he simply stood at the edge, eyes wide, mouth parted, watching the trees tremble with the breeze. The glass blossoms clinked softly, like wind chimes far away. Nalia watched him from behind the furthest trunk, expression unreadable, a crystal pomegranate in her hand. He didn't see her until she stepped forward. "I didn't know anyone actually lived here," he said. Then added, with a nervous laugh, "Well. Not really." Nalia remained silent. "I'm sorry," he tried again. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm a linguist. Kayan Vel. I study lost languages. Romantic dialects, mostly. Things no one writes anymore. Veska has legends. Songs. Letters carved in ancient bark and folded into time capsules. I came looking for them. Instead I found this." He gestured to the orchard. Nalia looked at his hand. Long fingers, calloused from turning too many pages. A scribbler, not a soldier. She considered turning away. "I'm not here for her," he said suddenly. Nalia's eyes narrowed. "I mean," Kayan hesitated. "You're Nalia, aren't you?" The orchard seemed to stop breathing. Even the blossoms swayed slower, as if listening. Kayan raised both hands gently. "I don't care what the records say. I read the tribunal transcripts. All of them. Your silence wasn't guilt. It was grief. I know what that looks like." Still she said nothing. He took a slow step forward. "I found something. I wasn't sure at first, but, here." From his satchel, Kayan withdrew a small case. He opened it like it held something sacred. Inside, a folded slip of parchment, soft with age, barely holding its own seams. A letter. Nalia blinked, just once. Your husband's last love letter, Kyan said. It was never entered into the record. He handed it to her. She did not reach for it. His handwriting matches earlier samples. I cross-referenced it with his diplomatic dispatches and your shared wedding vows. Those were public domain, unfortunately. Kyan's smile was brief, unsure. I found this inside a vault on Ever. Unclassified after an AI review. The tribunal missed it. Or ignored it. Nalia stepped forward at last. Took the letter with trembling hands. Opened it. The ink had faded, but the words were preserved. Line after line of longing. Phrases that mirrored the way he used to touch her hair. The way he'd call her, light thief, for stealing his sleep each time she turned to kiss him. Tears came unbidden. Kyan turned away, granting her privacy. She read it 3 times before folding it back and sliding it into the small pouch tied to her sash. She still didn't speak. Instead, she pointed to a fallen branch from one of the older glass trees. It gleamed with fractured light. She walked to it, lifted it, and scratched something into the salt-crust ground. One word. Why? Kyan crouched beside it. Because I believe love deserves better endings, he said softly. She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded, just once. That night, Kyan slept beneath a hanging curtain of pale leaves in the orchard's outer ring. Nalia left him a bowl of blue fruit water and a roll of vine bread. No spoken thanks passed between them, but none were needed. He began helping her the next morning, unasked. He cleared wind-fallen branches. Repaired irrigation veins. Translated ancient bark etchings from her late husband's journals, which she finally brought from the locked cellar beneath her quarters. He learned that she would never speak again, not from inability, but from vow. Silence was her language now. So Kyan adapted. He taught her how to sign again using reconstructed romantic dialects from pre-colonial theros, hand-shapes shaped like petals and metaphors. They invented a kind of shared language over the weeks. One made from glances and soft gestures. From letters passed beneath blossom canopies. From looks that lingered too long and touches that didn't need explanation. One day, as the orchard shimmered beneath dusk, Kyan asked, "Do you miss him every day?" Nalia signed, "Not every day. Some days, I only remember how he made me laugh." And now? She looked at him. "You make me think of spring rains," she signed. Kyan smiled. "That sounds like a line from one of his letters." "No," she signed, with a small tilt of her head. "It's mine." They didn't kiss that night. But he reached for her hand beneath the blossoms. And she let him hold it. On the 32nd day of his stay, Kyan found the symbol etched onto the underside of one of her fruit crates. It was the tribunal's stamp, the one used to classify evidence. He brought the crate to her. Nalia stared at it. Her face went rigid. "Why would they mark this?" he asked. She opened the crate. Inside, beneath layers of dried moss, was a black fruit. Perfectly round. Unblemished. It pulsed faintly with internal light. Kyan leaned close. "That's not a Lux orb, is it?" She shook her head. She pulled out a folded piece of faded velvet. Wrapped inside, a data crystal. Locked. Ancient. She placed both in Kyan's hands and signed. They never knew it was here. Kyan activated the crystal using his tablet's archival interface. The screen blinked, loaded, and displayed. Final transmission, Alaric Riven. Time code, 12 minutes before shuttle detonation. Kyan's breath caught. They watched together, hunched in the grove's central hollow. Alaric Riven's face appeared. Eyes hollow, voice shaking. "To my wife, Nalia. If you're seeing this, they've silenced me. They told me the deal was off, too many lives at risk. They said you would understand. But I know you won't. You'll blame yourself. Please, don't. You loved me in ways politics never could. Tell them, tell our son. I'm sorry. The screen went black. Kyan's jaw tightened. They buried this. Nalia touched his wrist, then signed. They buried him too. It took another week for Kyan to decide. I'm going back, he said, standing at the orchard's edge, duffel slung over one shoulder. Nalia stood beneath the central tree, where the blossoms had begun to fall. I'll submit the recording, he continued. I'll demand a review. A tribunal reopening. The truth can still matter. She didn't respond. Her eyes shone, but her face remained still. Kyan stepped forward. Took her hand. I don't want to leave, he said quietly. But I don't want you forgotten either. She placed something in his hand. A new Lux orb, smaller than most. Not yet ripe. But glowing. Kyan smiled, closing his fingers over it. I'll be back, he whispered. And for the first time, she made a sound. Not words. Just a breath, sharp, soft, and full of memory. As his skiff rose above the orchard, Kyan looked down. Nalia stood alone in the center of her grove. The wind caught her hair like flame in low gravity. Glass blossoms fell around her, catching the fading light, scattering it in every direction. To Kyan, she looked like a story not yet told. He would tell it. And when he did, he knew, the silence she kept wasn't emptiness. It was love, held too tightly to shatter. Kyan Vel hated the silence of government buildings. Not the quiet of libraries or stargazing chambers, he found those holy. But this silence was different. It wasn't calm. It was cultivated. Maintained. It crept through marbled hallways like perfume sprayed over rot. He stood before the Tribunal Archive Tower on Ever, the capital planet that had sentenced Nalia to exile. 12 years had passed since that ruling. 12 years of buried truths and unread evidence. He held the last thing her husband had ever said in a crystal shard locked in the memory case at his hip. And today, Kyan would play it for them. The entrance to the tower shimmered with a biosecurity scan as he stepped through. The front desk clerk, a soft-spoken synth hybrid, eyed his credentials without expression. Private archivist, she asked, one eyebrow arching. Independent petitioners require preclearance. Kyan nodded, slipping a woven permit chip across the counter. Clearance code VEL 83TR, audio-visual petition for review under retroactive evidence clause 22 beta. She blinked, then her eyes lit softly as the network scanned and confirmed. Her demeanor shifted. Ah. Apologies, Mr. Vel. I see the approval. Tribunal Room A4 has been reserved. Has the Oversight Committee been informed? 2 are attending. 1 observer from Eva Reform Coalition. That caught Kyan's breath. The coalition's involved. The clerk looked up. You didn't know. He shook his head. Well, she said, tapping something on her console, the speaker for the youth branch volunteered. You're presenting in front of him. Who? Her lips quirked slightly. Sylv Riven. Kyan nearly dropped the memory case. Sylv. The name had haunted the orchard like a ghost. Nalia had never spoken it, only written it once, pressed carefully into a note Kyan had found inside her orchard ledger. His name was Sylv. They told me he'd be safe. I believed them. He had thought the boy was taken far from Ever, raised in anonymity by sympathizers or distant kin. But now Sylv Riven stood here. Alive. Present. Serving in a youth reform group that advised on public trials. That meant. Kyan swallowed. He had no idea what this boy remembered. The tribunal chamber looked the same as the last time it ruined a life. Pillars rose like judgment itself, carved from deep ore stone that shimmered under artificial skylight. 3 floating lenses hovered over the bench, a formal relic of old Ever law, scanning presenters' words and expressions for deviations, though imperfectly. Kyan's pulse echoed in his skull. He placed the data crystal into the receiver. The projection node shimmered. The first portion of the recording loaded silently, waiting for his command. Then the door opened. Kyan turned. Sylv Riven entered with a slow, even gait. He was no longer a boy. He was perhaps 19 now, though his shoulders bore the tension of someone twice his age. Tall, broad-shouldered like his father, but his eyes. His eyes were Nalia's. Sylv wore a simple tunic in midnight blue with a single copper sash, the color of petition moderators. He stepped behind the witness dais without a word. For a moment, he simply stared at Kyan. 1,000 questions seemed to pass between them. Then Kyan spoke first. "I met your mother," he said quietly. Sylv's jaw clenched. "Where?" "On Veska." A pause. "Did she say my name?" Kyan didn't lie. "Only once." Sylv nodded, slowly. "And my father?" "She never stopped mourning him." Sylv's eyes flickered. But his voice remained steady. "You're here to challenge the ruling?" "Yes." "You know what that means?" Kyan nodded. "It means I'm risking professional exile, maybe worse. But I'm doing it anyway." Sylv studied him again. Then stepped back behind the moderator console. "You may proceed." Kyan inhaled, deeply. "My name is Kyan Vel," he began. "I'm a private linguist and independent researcher. I came across lost evidence relating to the death of diplomat Alaric Riven. The evidence includes a time-locked video message, recorded 12 minutes before his ship exploded. The message was sealed in a biocrystal inside a trade crate that was never opened during the original investigation. I found it on Veska, inside the orchard where Nalia Riven, his widow, was exiled." He tapped the control panel. The room dimmed. The recording played. Alaric's image appeared, holographic, tired, anxious. "To my wife, Nalia." The tribunal chamber held its breath. By the end, not even the floating AI lenses emitted sound. When the recording ended, Kyan closed the file and looked to Sylv. The young man stared at the empty air where his father had been. Then he spoke, not to Kyan, but to the lens above. "I request a formal pause for personal response." The lens pulsed once. "Approved." Sylv stepped away from the dais and stood at the far end of the room. He placed both hands on the window ledge overlooking Ever's lower skyline. Rain had begun to fall, a quiet rhythm against the glass. "I was 6, he said finally. "When they took her." Kyan listened. "They told me she confessed. That she sent him to his death with poison in his cloak lining. That she didn't deny it. That silence was admission." He turned slowly, eyes glassy. "I remember her holding my hand. I remember her singing to me under our glowvine tree. I remember her planting spices in the window garden because my father liked them on his eggs. That's all I remember." Kyan nodded. Sylv walked back to the dais. "Motion for tribunal review of verdict #A9173, he said, formal and steady now. "Grounds, previously unsubmitted court testimony and digital communication recovered from exile site." The Oversight Committee's proxy, an older woman with silver-tipped gloves, stood and folded her hands. "Seconded. Let the record show this case is now under revision." Kyan blinked. That was it. 12 years. One moment. The truth was breathing again. Outside the hall, Kyan waited for Sylv to emerge. When he did, they didn't speak right away. Then Sylv asked, "Does she hate me?" Kyan shook his head. "No. She mourns the day she let you go. Not because she wanted to. Because she was told she had to." Sylv looked away. I thought she didn't fight for me. She did, Kyan said. In every silence. Sylve closed his eyes. Will she let me see her? I don't know, Kyan said honestly. But I'm going back. Tomorrow. Sylve nodded. Take me with you. The next morning, they left Ever together. Sylve didn't pack much, just a jacket, a travel case, and the old ribbon from his father's tunic. He wrapped it around his wrist like a vow. As the shuttle rose, Kyan glanced at him. You look more like her every hour. Sylve didn't reply. But his eyes softened. 3 days later, the orchard appeared through the canopy mist, shimmering as always. Kyan stepped off the hoverpad first. Sylve followed, boots crunching softly on pale stone. Then Nalia appeared. She stood under the central tree, still, watchful. Her gaze swept over Kyan, briefly grateful, then moved to Sylve. She did not weep. She did not run. Instead, she walked forward. Step by deliberate step. Sylve's eyes filled, but he did not move either. When she reached him, she raised one hand. Touched his face. Then she wrapped her arms around him and held on as though she'd been drowning for years. Kyan looked away. Later, as the twin suns dipped low, Kyan found her standing at the orchard's edge, overlooking the fruit that now bloomed brighter than ever. She turned to him and signed. You brought him home. Kyan smiled. No, he said. He brought himself. She placed a blossom in his hand. You are part of this, too. He looked at the blossom. Then her. Does this mean I'm allowed to stay? She tilted her head. Then stepped forward. And this time, she kissed him. Not in sorrow. Not in goodbye. But in beginning. Sylve had never seen stars like these. Not even on Ever's observatory balconies, where children whispered myths between telescope turns, did they shine like this. Here, on Vesca, the constellations bloomed against a black-purple sky, uninterrupted by city lights or satellite glare. They looked hand-painted. As if someone had arranged them just for him. He sat alone beneath the tallest of the orchard's glass trees, knees drawn to his chest, cloak folded over him like the embrace of a parent long gone. His fingers held the edge of the letter his father had written, the one Kyan had translated, the one his mother kept tucked inside a velvet pouch all these years. He read the line again and again. Tell our son. I'm sorry. It shouldn't have been enough. But it was. It had been 2 weeks since Kyan brought him here. 2 weeks of watching his mother walk in silence, tending to the orchard with grace and ritual. 2 weeks of catching her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking, soft with regret, distant with longing. At first, they barely spoke. Well, he spoke. She didn't. But she signed. Slowly. Carefully. And he remembered enough to understand the rhythm of her fingers, the pulse behind each pause. He had once thought silence meant absence. Now he knew it could mean protection. On the morning of the 13th day, Sylve found her sitting in the West Orchard hollow, sharpening a broken branch into a garden tool. He approached cautiously. She didn't look up, but signed, You walk heavily. Like your father. He sat beside her. That's good, he said. I used to walk like a shadow. She smiled, brief and shy. He studied her hands. Did you teach yourself signing again? After they exiled you? No. I never forgot. He tilted his head. Why didn't you teach me before? She paused. Then, because I thought my voice was dangerous. Sylve exhaled, the words sinking into him like mist into dry soil. I didn't believe them, he said quietly. Not really. But I wanted to. I was so angry. They said you stayed silent because you were guilty. I told myself you didn't love us enough to fight. But deep down, I knew. You were just hurting. She reached out and touched his cheek. You were never the reason I stayed quiet. You were the reason I survived. That night, Kyan made them a stew from crystal roots and black salt, the only real meal he could cook with any confidence. They sat in the orchard clearing, their legs crossed on woven mats of reedgrass and driftwood, the sky like an overturned bowl of silver ink above them. As they ate, Sylve leaned toward Kyan and asked, "When did you know she wasn't guilty?" Kyan chewed slowly. "The first time I saw her orchard." Sylve blinked. "Why?" Kyan glanced at Nalia, who smiled behind her cup. "Because," he said, "you don't grow beauty in a place meant to break you unless your heart is still trying to love something." Sylve looked down at his bowl. "I want to speak," he said finally. "For her." "At the hearing." Kyan stilled. "Sylve." "No," the young man said. "Let me." Back on Ever, the tribunal was reassembling. It had been 51 days since Kyan submitted the lost message. Enough time for public outcry to build, for private documents to surface, for the names of the real conspirators to quietly vanish from public rolls. The new hearing was not for sentencing. It was for memory. A chance to reframe what had once been erased. The council chamber was full. Not just of officials and legal observers, but of students. Activists. Ordinary citizens who'd once believed the headlines. Many of them carried blossom pins on their collars, replicas of the glass fruit from Nalia's orchard. Kyan sat in the second row, heart thudding as Sylve stepped onto the dais. He wore no formal robe. Only a deep green tunic embroidered with the old glyph for truth told in bloom, a symbol his mother once carved into the orchard's root stones. He looked out at the crowd. Then back at the screen behind him, where the final frame of Alaric's message hung like a breath yet exhaled. Then he began to speak. "I am not here to correct the past," Sylve said. "Because the past doesn't need correcting. It needs remembering. We buried something living. And it still beats beneath our floorboards. I was 6 when the council labeled my mother a traitor. She never screamed. Never cried. That silence became their evidence. And it became my prison. I've spent the last 12 years running from what they left in me. Until a stranger brought me a letter. And a song." He paused. A breeze from the ventilation shaft ruffled the edge of his speech tablet, but he didn't look down. "My mother was not the fire. She was the soil. She held the roots while the rest of us burned. I saw her orchard. I held its fruit. I touched its leaves and felt the pulse of her grief inside them. And I forgive her." He looked up, voice shaking. "More importantly, I forgive myself for not seeing her sooner." Silence filled the hall. But not the kind Kyan hated. This was reverent silence. Holy. Holding space. Then the crowd began to rise. One by one, they stood, not clapping, but placing hands over hearts, as was custom for the most sacred forms of acknowledgement. Nalia watched from the private chamber. She did not cry. She did not need to. Her son's voice had returned what her silence could not. Later, in the dim quiet of an Eva rooftop, Sylve sat beside Kyan on a ledge overlooking the lower city. The stars were fainter here, but still present. "She'll never live here again," Sylve said. "No," Kyan agreed. "She belongs to the orchard now." Kyan smiled. "So do you, in a way." Sylve thought for a long time. "Not yet," he said. "I want to help plant more truth before I go back." Kyan nodded. "Then you'll know when it's time." Below them, the city hummed, gentler now. A little less cruel. Above them, stars moved. And with them, so did memory. Veska's skies turned amber before storms, not gray. Auburn clouds unfurled across the atmosphere like bruised silk, and the wind smelled faintly of mineral ash. The orchard would fall into stillness, not from fear, but reverence. The glass blossoms seemed to lean inward, waiting for the breath of rain that came only twice a year. Nalia loved this hour most. She stood barefoot near the ridge, where her orchard met the wildlands. The tips of her fingers brushed the air, catching the storm's pulse like a lover returning after a long absence. And tonight, she wasn't alone. Kyan stood beside her, shoulders draped in a linen shawl. He said nothing, just watched her profile, memorizing the shape of her silence. In the distance, the storm began. The rain fell in slow sheets of copper light, each drop hissing into the salt ground with tiny steam trails. Thunder rolled like ancient voices. She signed without looking at him. "Stay the night." Kyan didn't answer with words. He simply stepped closer, until their shoulders touched, and nodded. By nightfall, the orchard was cloaked in fog and rainfall. Inside her cabin, a rounded stone structure built half into the earth, Nalia lit the old root lamp. Its glow spread through the curved walls like gentle firelight. The hearthstones shimmered in response, calibrated to her body's heat signature. Kyan removed his damp outer cloak and hung it beside the door. He looked around as though seeing it for the first time, even though he'd visited this space more than once. Nalia knelt by the hearth and stoked a warming bloom from the kindling bowl, 3 petals of thermal moss, arranged like a cradle. "May I?" Kyan asked softly, gesturing toward the corner shelves. She nodded. He browsed slowly, taking in the careful rows of glass vials, pressed leaf records, woven bundles of orchard clippings. Then he paused at a small bundle wrapped in red string. He recognized it. "The letter," he murmured. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. He returned to the hearth, sitting opposite her on the woven mat. Lightning flashed through the window, briefly illuminating the curve of her cheek. She looked up, face calm. He met her gaze. "I wanted to say something," Kyan said finally, "but I don't want to disrupt your stillness." "Say it," she signed. "If it's true." He swallowed. "I love you." She didn't blink. She just held his gaze as if tasting the words in her mouth before deciding they were edible. "Then stay," she signed. "Until the orchard forgets how to bloom." His breath caught. Then he reached across the mat and took her hand. Their first kiss was quieter than the rain. No music, no urgency, just the press of his palm against her cheek, the way her lips met his like a question answered long before it was asked. And when they lay together that night, beneath a sky still rumbling with soft thunder, neither sought to replace the past. Only to hold it, gently, between them. Kyan traced the curve of her back with fingers that remembered every letter he had read aloud. And Nalia pressed her lips to his chest and listened to his heartbeat until it matched the rhythm of her orchard. In the days that followed, they fell into a new rhythm. Kyan began restoring the abandoned East Grove, clearing weeds, reactivating nutrient roots, replicating the songs Nalia once played to encourage blooming. She, in turn, began painting again, using sap pigments and pressed blossom dust. Her first canvas was a portrait of Sylve as a child, half-shadowed, half-bathed in orchard light. When Kyan found it drying on the flat stone bench, he stood for several minutes in silence before whispering, "You captured his voice." Nalia didn't reply. Instead, she handed him a second canvas. "Blank. For you," she signed. "Paint what's next." He stared at the empty space and smiled. One morning, Kyan woke to find her sitting by the central bloom, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes wide with thought. He joined her without a word. After a long pause, she signed. "Will you leave again?" Kyan took his time before answering. "If you ask me to stay, I won't." "I didn't ask that." "I know." He looked out over the grove. The wind rustled the petals like a lullaby. "But," he continued, "I'm not looking to be anywhere else. Not anymore." She turned to face him. Then signed. "Then stay, not as a guest." He blinked. "What does that mean?" "Build here," she signed. Your roots. Not just your rest. Kyan felt something click into place inside him. A belonging that wasn't tethered to purpose, but to place. To her. He nodded. I will. That afternoon, they built a shelter together near the eastern grove. Not a second home, not a hidden retreat. A shared space. The roof was woven from translucent reed glass, filtered to let in moonlight and shield against storms. The floor was made of pressed saltwood, etched with old Ever poems, some written by Kyan himself. Each evening, Nalia returned to her cabin with the brushstrokes of dusk on her palms, and Kyan joined her there only when invited. They preserved each other's solitude like rare fruit, cherished, never hoarded. Yet each morning, he was there. Beside her in the orchard. Inside her rhythm. One evening, she placed a soft fruit in his hand, a new bloom, still pulsing faintly. He recognized its shape. It's a cross fruit, he murmured. You created a hybrid. You helped, she signed. He studied it. Then lifted it to his lips and took a bite. The taste bloomed across his tongue, sweet but earthy. Unexpected. He laughed. It tastes like your silence. She smirked. Good. Then you understand me. By the third moon cycle, the orchard had doubled in size. Kyan mapped it each day, cataloging new fruit types. Some sang faint notes when opened. Others glowed like dusklight. One even shed seed mist that formed images in the air, memories stored in pollen. These aren't just fruits, Kyan whispered. They're language. Nalia nodded. Then signed. They are love, recorded in bloom. One night, as a rare aurora shimmered across Veska's sky, Kyan brought a folded paper to her porch. She opened it. Inside, handwritten in his voice. In a world of silence, you gave me a song without sound. In a grove meant to forget, you made me remember how to begin. She looked at him, eyes shining. And then she spoke. A single word, soft as duskfall. Stay.